Hi, friends. Welcome. We are a group of legendary friends and mentors and nerds who are reading through Tolkien's article on fairy stories. As we've said in our first video, you'll probably find the link in the description. It's a bit of a manifesto written over 100 years ago on why fantasy fiction literature absolutely needs to be a thing. And everybody in our legend fiction community absolutely believes that it needs to be a thing. So if Tolkien ever gets canonized, it might be because of this document, not to mention everything else that he's written. So what we're doing is reading through it like a couple of paragraphs at a time and getting through it and just sharing what we think. And trying to tie it into modern living, because it is almost 100 years later, and how we are as writers, trying to write and how to apply his, what he has to say to how we're trying to write and live today. So I've got the PDF up here. I'm on page 31 if anybody wants to follow along. And I've got a paragraph where he is chewing through a section on how people will object to fantasy literature because it is too escapist. And he is pushing back hard on that. I mean, he's somebody who came out of the horrors of the First World War. And so he's like, if we need to escape from anything, it's from a kind of world that says that's a necessity. We need to reimagine a world or something where we don't end up doing this sort of thing. So I'll read a little section here, and then we'll just go around in a circle, share what we think. And friends, you are welcome to join us in the comments and reply to anything that we're talking about. You can argue with us. You can praise us. We love the praise. And we will try to respond back to you. All right. So here's what he says. The rawness and ugliness of modern European life, in quotes, and then as an aside, that real life whose contact we should welcome, is the sign of a biological inferiority, of an insufficient or false reaction to environment. The maddest castle that ever came out of a giant's bag in a wild Gaelic story is not only much less ugly than a robot factory, it is also, to use a very modern phrase, in a very real sense, a great deal more real. Why should we not escape from or condemn the grim Assyrian absurdity of top hats, or the more Lockean horror of factories? They're condemned even by the writers of that most escapist form of all literature, stories of science fiction. These prophets often foretell, and many seem to yearn for, a world like one big glass-roofed railway station. But from them, it is, as a rule, very hard to gather what men in such a world town will do. They may abandon the full Victorian panoply for loose garments with zip fasteners. But they will use this freedom mainly, it would appear, in order to play with mechanical toys in the soon cloying game of moving at high speed. To judge by some of these tales, they will still be as lustful, vengeful, and greedy as ever. And the ideals of their idealists hardly reach farther than the splendid notion of building more towns of the same sort on other planets. It is indeed an age of improved means to deteriorated ends. It's part of the essential malady of such days, producing the desire to escape, not indeed from life, but from our present time and self-made misery, that we are acutely conscious both of the ugliness of our works and of their evil, so that to us, evil and ugliness seem indissolubly allied. We find it difficult to conceive of evil and beauty together. The fear of the beautiful fae that ran through the elder ages almost eludes our grasp. Even more alarming, goodness is itself bereft of its proper beauty. In fairy, the land of fairy with a capital F, one can indeed conceive of an ogre who possesses a castle hideous as a nightmare, for the evil of the ogre wills it so, but one cannot conceive of a house built with a good purpose, like an inn or a hostel for travelers, the hall of a virtuous and noble king, that is yet sickeningly ugly. At the present day, it would be rash to hope to see that one was not, unless it was built before our time. So this, however, is the modern and special, or accidental, escapist aspect of fairy stories, which they share with romances and other stories out of or about the past. Many stories of the past have only become escapist in their appeal through surviving from a time when men were, as a rule, delighted with the works of their hands, into our time, when many men feel disgust with man-made things. So that was a bunch. Let's just pause there for a second. I think if I can try to recap what he said very briefly, uh, a lot of what we create today, and again, he's talking back then, which is kind of funny. Like today, it's like, hooray, it's even better now. The modern brutalist style, and okay, their arguments can be made for the validity of it as a style, and arguments can be made against. And he's like, a lot of this is just profoundly ugly stuff. And so to be making beautiful places that are, or beautiful experiences or environments housed in ugly locations, or doing beautiful things that are presented in ugly ways, he's like, this is an inhumane, or it doesn't feel like a properly human thing, because in the land of fairy, which is this 50%, imaginal aspect of us that we partake in, a beautiful thing tries to look beautiful, it tries to work beautifully, and tries to be beautiful, and invariably an ugly thing ends up portraying itself as ugly and trying to not be beautiful, and so the exterior expression often matches the interior state. It's a bit of a sacramental sort of thing. Yeah, and then he sort of disses on the sci-fi, and this is back then. This is even before Star Wars showed up and Star Trek, and I was like, oh, you kind of that was pointing a finger at some of their mentalities as well. It's just like more, rather than trying to imagine better. Although I'm sure Star Trek fans are going to be ripping, into me in the comments, like, absolutely, Star Trek's trying to make it better. It's like, I haven't seen them all. I haven't. It's you had to be there, and I wasn't. But I've seen the new ones, and so, what do you think, Mary and Gabby? Anything come through your mind?
I definitely think you made some good points. With the science fiction, um, this isn't the case with all science fiction, but if the only thing that makes it science fiction is that there's fancy gadgets and you can go really fast in your amazing white glassed bubble on a new planet, it's not really improving things, or because basically it's like you're just taking the things that are in our world and just putting it on another planet. So yeah, it's kind of limited. But the thing I really thought was interesting in this section was he talked about how in the past, how there was like this desire or like a love for the things that people made with their hands, while now there's kind of a disgust for man-made things. And I think that is true even more. Like I kind of think of like people preferring like organic foods and natural things versus things that are, engineered. GMOs, everyone, they don't like GMOs. It's like they're so bad. How that's probably even more true than it was back in his time. That people have a disgust for many man-made things. Just interesting that he was
Mm-hmm.
already talking about that 100 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Gabby, anything come through your mind?
Yeah, honestly, so minor tangent, but the whole time you were reading that, I was picturing that scene in Wonder Woman where she's just come from Themyscira, this like beautiful
Oh
island with the
yeah.
ocean and the sky and the flowers and the plants and the Amazons, and then he like takes her to London, which is like all gray and spouting bilge and stuff, and she just turns around and she's like, "It's hideous." I was thinking, yeah, that's what Tolkien is describing right
There
here.
you go. I mean, she's
Yeah.
straight out of the realm of fairy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she is. And so, as I was thinking about that, I kinda latched on to what Mary did, which is just there's something like, our hearts kinda know, just on a fundamental level, the difference between something that is actually beautifully and carefully and thoughtfully and wonderfully and fearfully made, and then just something that was kind of slapped together for utilitarian sake. He was talking about, building robots, and I feel like he was talking also about, the factories that were building munitions or factories that are churning out whatever, that are just churning out everything where there's no thought, there's no heart, there's no love put into it. It's just kind of like spat out so that
Mm-hmm.
we can use it so that it serves a purpose. Um and how we just know on a fundamental level when something else is when it's different, when there's a
Mm-hmm.
life in it, even if it's not, like, traditionally, Arthurian beautiful, because he was talking about how you can't, like, take a place of beauty, like a what did he say? An inn or the hall of a king, and you can't fathom making it ugly. And then for a split second, I was thinking in my head, I was like, well, I can, because I write haunty. I write
Hold my
haunty.
beer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I was like, I write haunty stuff. So yes, I can. But as I was thinking more about it, what I was saying in my mind as ugly, which is like, cobwebs and moss and, gnarled trees and fog and stuff like that.
Mhm.
That's still beautiful in its own way because it's like the glory of nature coming out. I mean, sure, it's coming out in rot,
Mhm.
but and I was picturing something like that being the Hall of a Mountain King, but I can't picture something awesome like the Hall of a King or a Wonderful Inn being in like a warehouse. And I think that's the kind of ugly that he was talking about, like, "Let's just
Mhm.
do this so it functions and then move on,"
Mhm.
versus something that has had thought put into it, even if it's haunty thought, like fog and, mist and
Mhm.
what's that mold, not mold, it's like old man's beard, the stuff that hangs from trees? I don't know. I just thought of it,
I
and
don't
then I
remember the
wanted to
name.
think of the
Spanish
word
moss.
unprinciple. What's it called?
I think it's Spanish moss.
Spanish moss, okay. So, yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah. He's in this. I think he's making a point towards inhumane architecture,
Mhm.
um, and or in creativity or the production of things that are trying to abstract an idea of like being how do you say this, being purely functional.
Mhm.
I saw a red blah, losing words. It was a thread on Reddit about um, the rise of functionalist design, brutalist and like severe minimalism, and how it was like never been seen before in the middle of Art Deco. And what was the other thing that came out right before they modeled the elves of Lothlorien and all this after that art style? It wasn't Art Deco, it was Art Nouveau. Right, it's a very not only florid and floral, it's very densely designed in detail. And whether you like those or not, the point is it's trying to communicate different aspects, or it's trying to stylize aspects of nature, of reality, of of creation around us into ways that we can like reuse it over and over, sort of enchant ourselves with our living environments. And then there arose this school of thought after the First or Second World War, I can't remember, that rose or led to the larger brutalist design, which is like it needs to be absolutely functional first before it effloriates into anything. And actually, ideally, it shouldn't really effloriate. It should just be functional. And that's, I think it's pulled back into a more intentional movement today, which is more minimalist, but where minimalism is like intentionally attentive to the purpose of things without, flooding yourself with all kinds of details like everywhere. But back then, at the time, especially when Tolkien's writing, this was still brand new, and nobody had ever seen something that was trying to be very intentional, and it ended up being very ugly. And he's like, "This isn't human. It's not human to live in ugly, ugly places." Um,
It kinda gives the impression of, like, flattening or crushing the world around you, or just even pushing it away.
yeah.
Like, "Here's my box where stuff does not enter,"
Right.
versus these other things which are, like, interacting with and collaborating with and enjoying the world around you, like, oh, swirls, just these
Yeah.
geometric patterns or
Mhm.
flowers or whatever, and it has that interaction and appreciation, even though it
Mhm.
doesn't serve a purpose other than just being lovely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's a point at where this is an interesting sort of conversation, because there was a book that I once read called The Uses of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim, who was a Freudian psychoanalyst who used fairy tales to help children reintegrate their trauma. And it's a big, thick, really fascinating book with a whole bunch of his own insights and so on. I don't know how peer reviewed it all was, but it was a very interesting book about the why enchantment, especially through fairy tales themselves, like reading children lots and lots of fairy tales, why it was really helpful, and how he helped apparently reintegrate a whole lot of children and so on. And he made one observation, which is like children aren't necessarily stupid. Um, well, that's kind of obvious, but if you think that a child will be deluded by the idea that in fairy tales, everything beautiful is good and everything ugly is evil. And people say, well, that's going to, um, teach children all the wrong things about life because that's not actually true about real life. And he's like, no, you're right. You can have a beautiful aunt who is absolutely vicious and vindictive and evil, and children can tell that. They're not stupid. In the same way, you can have an old lady who lives at the end of the road who is ugly as sin, but kind as an apple pie. And we know and can understand, look past the big wart on the nose and the gray hair and the ugly old whatever. Kids can intuit and understand that. But that's because this whole thing that what is happening in the realm of fairy and in a fairy story, it is not set in the kind of real world that we're talking about. It's set in a kind of world where the interior state emerges or is made visibly present. And that's why you have Maleficent looking like a half dragon. I don't even know, with horns, and she just walks in and everybody's like, yeah, fairies, So it's because this realm of fairy it's almost sacramental. It's like a sacrament is, as we in Catholic theology, right? It's the exterior sign of an interior reality, an interior grace. And in fairy tales, we do this with icons and we mishmash the visuals and the sounds and their senses together to also communicate that stuff.
And honestly, I think in a lot of the fairy tales I've read, there is now there a lot of times there is the element of beautiful, good, ugly, bad. But then there are
Mhm.
also moments where it does show the reverse. Like the first thing I thought of was Red Riding Hood, where the wolf comes in dressed as the grandmother, so something appealing and lovely and inviting. Um, and that didn't turn out well. So like there's still these elements of yeah, there are there are different ways that people can see beauty either interiorly or exteriorly, even with say Beauty and the Beast or Cinderella. Cinderella was always covered in ashes and dressed in tatters, but she was lovely. She was a lovely person. Or the original Beauty and the
Mhm.
Beast, yes, she was stunning, but the reason she was able to so were her stepsisters, so were the ugly I'm sorry, ugly as in nasty ones. They were stunning too, but the reason that she was able to break the curse was because she was a beautiful person. And so, really, the fairy tales do kind of allow you to interact with the world beyond just the superficial level. It's just like you said, that then the superficial level, in whichever way is most, like it helps the story along the most, that's then just how it responds to the point of the inside of the character.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. As a total aside, you mentioned the wolf, and I'm like, oh, I want to see the wolf being interviewed on The View by other lady wolves, going like, "What was your skincare routine to confuse that little girl?" Because that was
That has
Mary.
confused me since I was a child. I was like, "What do you mean she thought the wolf
Yeah,
was her grandmother? How
maybe
did
she had nearsighted little girl or
she"
something. I don't
Maybe.
know. Mary, any thoughts from you after all that, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I was thinking of, well, I love what you said about the fairy tales being a place where the interior state can be made visible. I think that's great. I really try to do that in my books. I like that kind of theme of trying to be able to see what's going on the inside. Um, but I also was thinking about what Gabby said. I think one of the themes of these fairy tale stories a lot of times is deception. Sometimes the fairies can kind of deceive humans by appearing to be something that they're not. Um, but when they do reveal their true nature, if it's something evil, then they are usually ugly. When you think at the beginning of Beauty and the Beast, there's the fairy, well, I don't know, fairy witch, whatever you want to call it, enchantress. I think they call her enchantress.
Mm-hmm.
And she shows up as an old hag, and the prince is really rude to her. And then after he refuses to help her, then she transforms into this beautiful woman, and that was her true nature. But she was kind of testing him. So, um, so I think that maybe sometimes with the reversal, it's because it's like a trick. But yeah, by the end of it, usually the you can like Red Riding Hood eventually figures out that that's not her grandma,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a
Yeah,
trick.
yeah. I
So,
like a good ruse to elicit a response or to test you to see how you're going to respond. So, okay, let's move on to the next paragraph. It's also kind of a big one, but I think it's a good one. It's also we're talking about a different kind of escapism. So he says, there are also other and more profound escapisms that have always appeared in fairy tale and legend. There are other things more grim and terrible to fly from than the noise, stench, ruthlessness, and extravagance of the internal combustion engine. There are hunger, thirst, poverty, pain, sorrow, injustice, death. And even when men are not facing hard things such as these, there are ancient limitations from which fairy stories offer a sort of escape, and old ambitions and desires, touching the very roots of fantasy, to which they offer a kind of satisfaction and consolation. Some are pardonable weaknesses or curiosities, such as the desire to visit, free as a fish, the deep sea, or the longing for the noiseless, gracious, economical flight of a bird, that longing which the airplane cheats, except in rare moments, seen high and by wind and distance, noiseless, turning in the sun. That is precisely when it's imagined and not used. There are profounder wishes, such as the desire to converse with other living things. And C.S. Lewis, not me, I'm fine with that one. On this desire, as ancient as the fall, is largely founded the talking of beasts and creatures in fairy tales, and especially the magical understanding of their proper speech. This is the root, and not the confusion, attributed to the minds of men of the unrecorded past, an alleged absence of the sense of separation of ourselves from beasts. A vivid sense of that separation is very ancient, but also a sense that it was a severance, a strange fate, and a guilt lies on us. Other creatures are like other realms with which man has broken off relations, and sees now only from the outside at a distance, being at war with them, or on the terms of an uneasy armistice. There are a few men who are privileged to travel abroad a little. Others must be content with travelers' tales, even about frogs. In speaking of that rather odd but widespread fairy story, The Frog King, Max Mueller asked, in his prim way, "How came such a story ever to be invented? Human beings were, we may hope, at all times sufficiently enlightened to know that a marriage between a frog and the daughter of a queen was absurd." Well, indeed, we may hope so. For if not, there would have been no point in this story at all, depending as it does essentially on the sense of the absurdity. Folklore origins, or guesses about them, are here quite beside the point. It is of little avail to consider totemism, for certainly whatever customs or beliefs about frogs and wells lie behind the story, the frog shape was and is preserved in the fairy story precisely because it was so strange and the marriage absurd, indeed abominable. Though, of course, in the versions which concern us, Gallic and German and English, there is in fact no wedding between a princess and a frog. The frog was an enchanted prince. And the point of the story lies not in thinking frogs possible mates, but in the necessity of keeping promises, even those with intolerable consequences, that, together with observing prohibitions, runs through all fairyland. This is one of the notes of the horns of Elfland, and not a dim note. All right, we'll pause there for a second. Any thoughts on that? Mary, anything that you thought?
Yes. So at the ending there, he talks about what the Frog Prince is really about. It's the point of the story is not about like the frog marrying a human being. It's about keeping those promises, which is one of the things that I really think is so intriguing about fairy tales, is that they have like these rules and things that is like he puts like these prohibitions about things you can't do, and if you do break it, something terrible is going to happen. And the importance of keeping a promise, even if it seems like it's something small and not even that important. Like Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia has a lot of these examples of like things where there's like certain rules and you don't really know why that rule is there. But you better follow it. There's something terrible is going to happen. George MacDonald does too, I think, in a lot of his stories. But it's kind of like when I read those stories as a child, it's I don't know. It adds to the mystery of the story. Like you're trying to, you don't really know why you have those rules, and maybe that's one of the most childlike parts of that story is because of fairy tales. Is that like when you are a kid, a lot of times you do have to follow all these rules that don't seem to make any sense until you get older and you realize why they have all those rules. So I thought that was neat that he talked about that.
Yeah, no, that is good. And that's the fun thing of sometimes about fairy tales, right? And just fiction storytelling, like what you do with Avalon and the novels you're writing about Avalon, which is taking a truth like what he said there. The point of the story is whether you pay attention or not to not pay attention, whether you take seriously the promises that you made, no matter what happens, and then you take that idea and then you wrap it inside something that seems completely ridiculous, like A Princess and a Frog, to the point where somebody who, I don't know who Max Mueller is, I'm assuming he's somebody smart enough for Tolkien to quote him as some sort of an authority, to the point where someone like that could like completely miss the point in the same way that a child would like also kind of completely miss the point. And then the point would sort of get Trojan horsed, into the mind through this very weird story situation. There's other interpretations, why a frog at all. That's also very interesting and stuff. But just from the point of view of sometimes these stories present a ridiculous situation to sort of get you to stop and like, maybe you need to go over to the campfire and sit down and listen to that story because I don't know how that one ends. And then the meaning just kind of slips in a way where it doesn't have to fight with you. Sometimes if you read a story and you're kind of fighting with it, hello, preachy fiction today, you're not learning that lesson because you're thinking about it, you're arguing with it, you're sort of fighting with it, as opposed to a not a rule, but a law or an idea that's communicated through the actual lived reactions and responses and experiences of a character. And then you agree with all of those, and then you get to the end and you go, okay, I felt my way through that all the way to the end, and I can understand that. And so maybe then I accept that as a truth or something. What do you think, Gabby? What's going through your mind?
Yeah, super quick, I Googled him. Max Mueller was a philologist who's German-born British,
Oh,
and
so
I think
competition. Okay.
and I think he did, he made, like, an index about, like, all kind of fairy stories and what their key points were, what storyline they followed, what their overall and, like, how they were similar or how they were different, and broke them up into
Okay.
categories, that kind of a thing. So my first thought was actually something very at the very, very beginning of the excerpt, which was how he was talking about, um, I don't remember the exact words, but like that ugly brutalist kind of a thing. How, yeah, there are worse things in the world than that. There are things like poverty and loneliness and hunger and despair and war and stuff like that. And I was just thinking about how, the brutalist style, that ugly style, that man-made style, it really is meant to do away with those worst things. Like, hey, you're getting sheltered, you're getting fed, you're getting basically protected. It works and it doesn't cost so much and it's the best we can do kind of a thing to get rid of all those worst things. And I think maybe what his point is that we've just then gone to settle for that. Like, hey, it works. It keeps the worst things away. It keeps the like ugly stuff at
It's like
like
the
the
least we could do.
exactly. The bar is right there and we've just we've just surpassed it. And I think his point is let's not lower the bar so much. These brutalist things, great. They work. Mm. But let's then not forget about how much higher we can go. Like let's not settle for this big clunky flying machine when we can imagine what it's like to be a bird. When we could have these feathers and this beautiful flight. And he did something else. It wasn't a well, the other example was similar,
Yeah, going
but
deep into the oceans, like
that's what it was,
these
the
are
fish.
deep
Right,
desires that we have. Yeah.
exactly. So not to just get so kind of sedated in this lowest common denominator that we're forgetting how much higher we can go, and I think that's what he's saying that a lot of people do and why they don't like or why they disregard or disparage, escapism or fantasy or fiction or stuff like that is because they're like, well, that's not the basis for what we need to survive. And it's like, well, what if we went past that? What if we didn't just survive? What if we thrived?
Mhm. Yeah, agreed. Well said. All right, let's keep going. So he's got another paragraph. There, lastly, there is the oldest and deepest desire, the capitalized, the great escape. It is the escape from death. Fairy stories provide many examples and modes of this, which might be called the genuine escapist or I would say fugitive spirit. I guess that would be like the running away from, is why he would pick that word. But so do other stories, notably those of scientific inspiration, and so do other studies. Fairy tales are made by men, not by fairies. The human stories of the elves are doubtless full of the escape from deathlessness. But our stories cannot be expected always to rise above our common level. They often do. Few lessons are taught more clearly in them than the burden of that kind of immortality, or rather, endless serial living to which the fugitive would fly. For the fairy story is especially apt to teach such things of old and still today. Death is the theme that most inspired George MacDonald. But the consolation of fairy tales has another aspect than the imaginative satisfaction of ancient desires. Far more important is the consolation of the happy ending. Almost, I would venture to assert that all complete fairy stories must have it. At least I would say that tragedy is the true form of drama, its highest function, but the opposite is true of fairy story. Since we do not appear to possess a word that expresses this opposite, I will call it Eucatastrophe. The Eucatastrophic tale is the true form of fairy tale and its highest function. And so I'm just going to pause for a second to infer something. When he says the word, the true form of fairy tale, it might be is it a Neoplatonist kind of reference? For those who study Philosophy 101, if that's one of you friends, please say hi in the comments, correct me. But the idea is that, like according to the Neoplatonists, I think there is an ideal form of every single thing that exists. So what you are looking at is an embodiment of a true reality that exists somewhere else. And an incarnational theology, like a lot of us Catholics might be like, yeah, there's an angel for every single thing that's kind of out there. And every dog that's out there is an expression of not just dogness, but of some great dog angel theme or something. There's like a perfect expression of a thing or a perfect idea of a thing. And for God, every idea is alive at some level. So when he says the Eucatastrophic tale, and he'll go on to describe it, is the true form of a fairy tale. It's like when you look at a tree and you abstract and you see treeness in your mind, and you can look at any tree and you can tell the difference between a tree and a bush. It's because as a human person, you've understood the form of a tree. And it's funny because this is not something that you can actually teach somebody or pass on. It's something that you just intuit. It's an amazing human ability that we just have to just learn at some point how to magically kind of tell the interior nature of a thing and how to see it across all kinds of different iterations of it and understand it and identify it. And it's unteachable, but it's just something that we do. So he's saying the same thing. When you have a variety of fairy tales and you're reading through a variety of stories, if you want to understand the true definition, the true idea of a fairy tale, this is it. And it embodies down in a variety of different sort of tellings. And if it doesn't have this thing, his contention is, well, it's not a true fairy tale. So he goes on to say, the consolation of fairy stories, the joy of the happy ending, or more correctly, of the good catastrophe, the sudden joyous turn, for there's no true end to any fairy tale. This joy, which is one of the things which fairy stories can produce supremely well, is not essentially escapist nor fugitive. In its fairy tale or otherworld setting, it is a sudden and miraculous grace, never to be counted on to recur. It does not deny the existence of discatastrophe, of sorrow and failure. The possibility of these is necessary to the joy of deliverance. It denies, in the face of much evidence, if you will, universal final defeat, and insofar as evangelium, giving a fleeting glimpse of joy, joy beyond the walls of the world, poignant as grief. And then the last section, and then I want to ask you ladies what you think. I know, Mary, this is your favorite part. It is the mark of a good fairy story of the higher or more complete kind that, however wild its events, however fantastic or terrible the adventures, it can give to child or man that hears it, when the turn comes, a catch of the breath, a beat and lifting of the heart, near to or indeed accompanied by tears, as keen as that given by any form of literary art, and having a peculiar quality. All right, Mary, what do you think about all of that? What's going through your mind?
This part is so beautiful. It's still just as beautiful as when I read it the first time. I was in high school. Just that joy beyond the walls of this world. I just love it so much. And also, like, not only does he write about it, but that's it. Totally, a eucatastrophe happens in the Lord of the Rings. Like, he kind of created like a really, really good example of it at the end when you think everything's going to be lost and Frodo's just going to get consumed by the power of the ring, and Gollum bites his finger off, falls into the lava, and the ring gets destroyed. Everyone thought they were going to lose it. There's no hope. There's no way that they could possibly win. But then there's this huge good catastrophe that happens. And so, yeah, I don't know. And that's cool that, of course, he being a lover of languages, he would make up his own word for it too. It's not even just like a good, he said, not just a good ending, but it's something that is, yeah, like a turn. It's like very, it's not just like, oh, and then, things worked out and everything was fine. No, there's a lot of, there has to be a lot of opportunities for sorrow or failure or things like that to seem to be what's going to happen. But then there's a sudden turn so that it isn't what ends up happening. And that's what makes a really good story. Like when Star Wars does it too, and the Death Star gets blown up first time and the second time. Yeah, I mean, we love this stuff. I love this stuff.
Agreed. Gabby, is that your first time like being acquainted with this line of thinking from him?
Yeah, this is my first time. The only thing I had heard before was the last time we talked, which was the thing about the flight of the prisoner versus the deserter kind of a thing, but the rest of this is completely new to me.
Okay. Anything come through your mind after that?
Yeah, I mean, it just the way he was phrasing that sounds to me like somebody who really, really loved reading. Like the way he was describing that feeling at the end, that part where it says, the joy beyond the walls of this world, or he said something like that. And then he said something about it can even bring you to tears. And I'm like, yeah, this is the guy who loves reading and who has felt that feeling that we all feel when we read like a really, really well written story. And I also was then thinking how he was talking about the joy and the tears and sorry, say it again. What eucatastrophe and discatastrophe? When he was talking about those, I was thinking about how all the best stories have that at the end. If you have an ending where just everything goes to mess and that's it, the end, you're like, why was I here the whole time? Why did I go through all of that just to be crushed at the end? Or then you have the flip side and you have these like saccharine sweet this never happens endings. Then it just feels like cute. It doesn't feel as impactful, but the really, really good ones are the ones that even if they have a lot of sacrifice, even if it seems like kind of a tragic ending, like, I mean, I'm sure I got like 4 stories back there where the main character dies at the end. But even with that, the way that it's done is it focuses on this element of sacrificing yourself for someone you love or for hope or something. And so I really just latched on to how well he kind of knew that you need both. You need just that angst and that agony even for it to actually feel realistic and for the happy part then to feel earned, for it to feel real, for it to be even more glorious at the end, but you can't just have like an awful ending. It's kinda like it's like Jesus. It's like you need the cross for the resurrection to be so amazing, but you can't just end at the cross. I mean, that's messed up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do you think, Mary?
that's exactly what he's going to say next.
Yay! I channeled Tolkien again.
Yay, good job.
I'm trying to think how to if you're like a writer in our community and you're reading this and you're like, wow, that's great. So what should I do with the ends of my stories now? And I'm thinking about what he did with Gollum and how at the end, the surprise moment is, of course, Gollum is the one who ends up saving everybody through his own weakness. And of course, there's Frodo's own weakness too. And so that's, always a surprise kind of thing. What am I trying to say? It's like if you construct a story where the end is predictable, even if it's something like Frodo made it all the way to the end and he was good and he managed to throw it in and it was supremely hard to do, but he finally did it. And effectively the same Frodo just got a little nicer and a little bolder and a little braver, and then he won and the story is better and the whole world is saved. That is a story that has been told over and over and lots, and we've read those. You get to the end of that, and I kind of wonder if you really remember that. Because you basically, it's like playing a computer game, and you level up your skill tree a little bit, and then your character defeats the final boss, and then you go back to your life, and you haven't actually, nothing's actually changed, you haven't learned anything. How many novels have we read or stories have we written that are just like that? Whereas, I'm trying to make sense of this. I'm curious what you ladies think. The sense that he seems to be pulling at here is that because you're dealing with the realm of fairy, there must reach a point where you can't go any further, because the story you're in is not exclusively about you. You are participating in something that is also bigger, that involves other people, it involves the world itself, it involves the one who emerges from beyond the walls of the world to help you accomplish something you can't do on your own, because it's not humanly possible. You're trying to solve problems that are bigger than an individual human life or human capacity. Like he mentions, injustice and fear and pain. These are not things that a human can solve. These are things a human contributes to and tries to fix. And the playing field is not an even playing field when you're dealing with things like evil beings, some of whom are far significantly more powerful than a human capacity to deal with it. And so you go up against that kind of a boss battle. Its skill tree doesn't matter. It's a category difference of, the context is completely different. You need something else must come in. And so I'm thinking of like the hero's journey. What's the point of a story? Why we keep coming back to the idea of a hero's journey? Well, it comes from the mysteries, from, ancient cultures, which is a sense that you're going to put yourself on a path, an adventuring path, effectively, but it's going to bring about your death. Something in you must die so that something else can come to life or make room for something else to grow that has greater capacity to do the thing. And that moment of death, that Calvary, is the one thing we all absolutely want an insurance plan for, and we don't want to have to actually deal with. So I'm trying to sort of bring this home for like myself as an author and for those of us in our communities. I think that after what might be sort of muddying this in my mind, it's like it's been 100 years of people reflecting on this and perhaps bringing it into their stories. And I'm thinking of some of the best stories that we know and love today. There's almost always some kind of a surprise end, right? I don't know if you've read, I think it's either Save the Cat or one of these other ones where it's like you get to the end and then they have, okay, there's one climax, and then you double down, and then there's like a major problem, you try to solve it, and then that fails, and then the hero is progressively isolated from the rest of the team, and then all of those plans fail, and then it's finally the main character, the one that you started with, now with absolutely nothing, and there's no possible anything else, and you're staring failure and defeat in the face. And this is the point of the whole story. And then some stories will just have them punch 3 more times harder and then you win. Whereas Tolkien would be like, it's at this point that something else, it could be an insight, which is fairy magic language for like something else coming from outside of you, to inspire you and give you that, oh, I would never have thought of putting this and this together, and all of a sudden I can do this thing.
Yeah, Dominic, sorry, I think what you're talking about is when he says that it comes from a sudden and miraculous grace that can never be counted on to happen again.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something coming from the outside. Frodo was never going to be enough in and of himself to throw the ring into the fire. And back in Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf said that Gollum might serve his purpose yet. Like, why didn't you kill him when he Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance? Well, it's really good good thing he didn't, because he ended up being the one who needed to be there for it to happen. Yeah. So I think, yeah, what you're saying is like, yeah, the good stories is like the human or the protagonist puts everything they can into it and they're still failing. They're trying and they cannot get there. And then something comes, yeah, like this is what I think. It's like God entering in and working, and making something happen that is just beyond what the hero could do.
Hmm.
Um, and
What
that's
do you think,
something that we
Gabby?
can
Yeah.
do because we're Christian writers.
Well,
Um,
we believe that this is how reality works. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's also part of, to me, the give me a second. Eucatastrophe. I think that's
Yeah.
also part of the eucatastrophe, because if we just did that thing where it's like the character's a pretty good person and then they get to the end and they just are even better and they, like you said, punch 3 times harder and that's how they win, and it's like, well, that's kind of frustrating for us because then it's like, well, I guess I'm just white knuckling it to the end. I guess I'm just gonna crawl across the finish line and I just gotta figure it out. And that's kind of discouraging, I guess. Whereas if you have, of course, this element of perseverance and this element of, never backing down and self sacrifice, but then there's that added element of something is going to change. Something has to transform. Something has to die and come back brand new and grander. That is part of the encouraging way that a story ends. Like, yeah, okay, it's going to be a slog for a while, but when I confused not metaphors, euphemisms, sorry. When it comes down to it, when things
Mhm.
get serious, there's going to be this thing that happens that's not just me gritting my teeth and standing my ground when, like you said, it's a categorical difference. Like, there is not
Mhm.
even this is not something that literally is within my capacity to stand up against. But
Mhm.
if there's this change, if there's this death and resurrection, then there's hope for me as a person just trying to get through life. And
Mhm.
it's reflected in that climax, then through the catastrophe.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that um, there's probably some people watching or in the comments who are like, well, what about this story and this story? And it's like, well, I think there's a little bit of a difference between the kind of stories that we're telling.
Oh, yeah.
Case in point might be something I saw a year ago or this 8 months ago. I don't remember. I think it's called Roadhouse with Jake Gyllenhaal. Anyhow, he's like a traveling fighter, and he ends up
Oh, yeah.
in the where's not the Everglades, Tampa, Florida, I can't remember. Anyhow, beautiful location, and he just decides that he's going to show up and just protect this one little roadhouse, and that's a story of just simply slogging it through and punching 10 times harder. Now, that's not the point of the story. That's kind of the side effects, like, hooray, we get to see some, real boxing and really good fighting, really well done. And the point of the story is, what kind of a man are you when you see other people in pain? Are you going to stand up for what's right and just? So contributing towards justice. And then you're like, well, where's the Eucatastrophe in that one? It's like, well, maybe there isn't, because it's not trying to be a fairy story. It's like, what are you talking about? Well, maybe if you were to put things on a timeline, the purpose or the form of a fairy story is to pay attention to like the overall point of your entire life and what it means to be a human at all. And that's why a story like Lord of the Rings, for example, it's like his quintessential fairy tale. Um, that story just feels beautifully complete because you can read your entire life, the overarching tone of your entire life, into all of the beats that happen in that story, as opposed to something like Roadhouse or some of these other ones, where it's just like, this is not meant to be like a map or a mapping of all of reality. It is meant to be like a month of the timeline within your like whole reality. So the fairy tale is dealing with ultimate things, ultimate reality, and that's often why, if you don't have some of these more religious feeling elements, things that are very existential, like why do I exist? Why do I matter at all? If I fail, everything is lost. I am completely lost. Not, well, I just won't collect my paycheck and I'll just go to the next town and start again. It's like, no, this is existential stuff. If you don't wake up at 9 or 10 a.m. at night and pluck the golden feather from the thing, everybody dies. Those kinds of stakes are always very, very high. And then at the end, you can't like win exclusively on your own by punching 3 times harder. And so, again, for those who ask, well, when can I tell a story about punching 3 times harder? That's fine, and you can, but just understand it's not a fairy tale. It's a story about a specific aspect of what it means to be a human, and that can be insanely valuable and a good story. But just understand it's not what a fairy tale is trying to accomplish. It's a different thing, and it can be just as valid. It's just a matter of understanding fairy tale is trying to accomplish a different thing. And so, again, this sense of coming back to the idea that, like he says this line earlier, fairy tales are stories told by humans, not stories told by elves. And we're borrowing the language and the mindset and the sort of sacramental iconography that comes from this more imaginal, this angelic, this fairy realm to give voice and vision to the things that we feel are deeply human and deeply true that you don't see when you step outside your back door and look around. And that's where he's talking, pushing back on everybody who's like, it's just not realistic. You're not going to find it in the morning newspaper and in the factory down the road. Like, you don't see any of these things. And he's like, why are they universally human and real? And we all feel them deeply real. We're all cosmically deluded, or you haven't got on the same page with the rest of humanity and the fact that these things are real. And if they are real, then what does that mean about us? And then how do we map and make sense of these so that we can make sense of them and then be able to share them with other people? Because 3 days later, you'll forget what you were talking about, and how it all connects. And so you then sort of lock it down a little bit, into a story. And then maybe this is what our community is up to. You got to retell that story like 50 different ways, because each of us are going to see a slightly different in and a slightly different out. And there's a slightly different relation to that moment of grace. Mary, thanks for bringing that back. That moment of grace that you didn't expect, that can come from almost anything. It can come from a weird animal, can come from a loved one, come from a friend, from a brick falling on your head or an apple. Grace operates through everything. And the realm of fairy is completely porous and open to grace flowing and operating through everything. I think I might have side quested myself out to I don't know where. Anyhow, any closing thoughts on anything? Mary, anything that you think?
Yeah, I guess I would just say, because we're all trying to write stories, if you are trying to write a fairy tale type story, that I know, like for me, when I'm working on it, I think about really setting up the stakes to make them really high for the main character. And there usually is a lot of darkness and suffering before you get to that big turn. But that's because that makes a really wonderful contrast when you do make the turn. You want to have it seem really dire right before, but don't end it there. If you're doing a fairy tale, then you need to flip it. Take the thing that was so awful, and that moment of grace flips it around and makes it into something beautiful. Like Jesus with his passion and then death and then the resurrection. It's all beautifully woven together.
I would say just go read. Read a fairy tale and just savor it and enjoy it, and don't dissect it, but notice. Like, notice the way that the imaginal realm and the world of fairies is coming forward in this story. So because the more that you sit in it and soak in it and enjoy it, you're going to be able to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And again, I'm thinking for those who are like, well, I want to tell a story about an anti-hero. Like, where does that fit? Or, or I want to tell something like Game of Thrones or something that's grim dark, Can I ever write that kind of story if I've got to have a Eucatastrophe? And it's like, well, maybe not. I think if you tell the beginning and end of your story, but then recognize, okay, let's say it's an anti-hero and everything ends really badly and that's the end of the story. Honestly, I think an anti-hero story is meant to be a cautionary tale, just with a big budget. Or Game of Thrones, it's also like a cautionary tale with a big budget. It's kind of why I like it in many respects. But as an author, you can like step outside the limits of the story and recognize they're human beings, technically. We're talking animals, persons, basically. As a person, the life experience doesn't end when the page closes, frankly, not even with death. God continues to work with that. So therefore, this is a segment of your timeline. It's not the whole thing. And so again, this is trying to go back to honor what Tolkien is saying. This is probably the only kind of story that we create that tries to honor the entirety of a human experience, of a human life or a person's life, being a person at all in this kind of universe. Anything that doesn't have the elements then it can be a valid and a valuable segment. And within that segment, there can be a very important lesson to be shared and learned and worked through and processed. And we got to stack loads of lessons on top of each other to then be able to see and understand the bigger ones. But out of all the stories that we have, which one tries to capture maybe the greatest, grandest feeling, maybe the truest sense of what it means to be a person? I think he's saying that this is it. Now, 100 years later, we might not use the word fairy tale anymore. We might say the word fantasy. And then that has also been like muddled and could mean like all kinds of everything. So I don't know, maybe we need a new word for this. And maybe chat, that's the challenge for this whole thing, is like, if we were to propose a new word for this, I don't know that it would be mythology anymore. It's certainly not Sunday school catechesis. It's not necessarily fairy tales, although you can try to sort of bring it back. But it's this kind of story, it's this kind of reality or pattern or idea that sits behind these great, they almost end up always being epics, because one person's individual story is not enough, because we're not saved alone on our own. It's our Father who art in heaven. We're saved as a human family. That's how that works. You're saved as a group with friends. You fight and you win and you fail together with friends. I think that's why it just impelled him to write something so grand and massive as Lord of the Rings, because it's like, this captures everything I believe to be true about life. There's a Eucatastrophe, there's friendship, there's good in the world, and it's worth fighting for, and all of that. So, well, that basically gets us to the epilogue. So hopefully next week we will track through the epilogue and see where we end up. And friends, if there's a quote or a segment from this, I think this is everybody's favorite segment, this Eucatastrophe thing. If you have a quote from this that really moves you, go ahead and drop it in the comments. We would love to hear from you. And if this kind of thing, these kinds of conversations interest you, you can also come and check us out at legendfiction.com, create a free profile, hang around. You can send me a DM, with your hot take and your arguments, and I'm happy to chat with you. You can also do it right here on the chat, and it's going to help this video reach a lot more people. We are trying to find all of the Catholic and Orthodox fantasy fiction authors and sci-fi too. Frankly, anybody who wants to write and have fun, come and do it with us at Legend Fiction. Why? Well, because it's fun. And you can triple your writing output, because I know that's what happened for me. All right. Till next time, have a great rest of your week. And dang it, I've forgotten our catchphrase.
May the Lord be with you.
This is the way.